Hello and welcome to this new webinar with Connolly's Red Mills and the Irish Horse Board. We're absolutely delighted to have Erin back to go through preparing your horses for that sales prep period. So at this stage, I don't think there's much of an introduction I need to do, but as always, if you have any questions, pop them in the comments box and we'll make sure to ask Erin at the end of the presentation. But yeah, thank you very much, Erin, and I'll let you take to the.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. I will just get the presentation up and then we will get started. So this is our third webinar of the series. We've had the first one on nutrition for late pregnancy and preparing your mare for recovering again and foaling. And then we had early foal nutrition. So the next step in our webinar series will be sales prep. So we'll try and look at all the different angles that you might need to come from when looking at nutrition and kind of getting that individual where it needs to be by the time sales comes around. So like Sarah said, if you have any questions as we go along, pop them in and we'll come to them at the end. So I will kick on. Okay, achieving your sales targets. There are a lot of different aspects that will be involved in reaching what you want that individual to look like at sale date. So whether it's a foal or a 3-year-old is irrelevant. There'll be a lot of different things that you have to take into consideration to get them to where you need them to be by that date. And I think it's important not to underestimate the fact that they need to be nourished properly the whole way along, which was the whole point of this webinar series, is to emphasize the fact that we need to nourish them from their in utero in the mare, then when they're young and they're born, and right through to, even if it is not until they're a 3-year-old, until then, and they'll be ready whatever stage you need them to be. And one of the key things in that process from the start to when you're selling them is their body condition and making sure that they are at that optimum level by the time it comes to selling them. Because obviously, from the buyer's eye, they need to be well-rounded, they need to have good condition, and they need to be looking well. So body condition is the key one to look at, and you can monitor that yourself all along the way, obviously. Top line then is the next important step for making sure that they're perfectly rounded off and again catching the eye at sales. Coat condition is important because you don't want them going to the sales with an orangey tinge to their coat or looking copper deficient or anything like that. You want them gleaming and looking nice and smart. You want them to be well developed in their strength and size. Feet is never to be underestimated. And we'll discuss all of these things separately. As well as then obviously at the sales, you want them to be calm and relaxed and have a nice even temperament. And then good health is something that never can be underestimated, because if you haven't got a healthy individual, you haven't got anything really. So we'll go through these different aspects and how we're going to get to where we need to be with each of them in terms of nutrition. So condition for sales. Like humans, horses will gain weight by consuming more calories than they will utilize. So when you're selecting a feed for weight gain, you need to look at a calorie dense feed. And by looking at the bag of feed, there'll be a unit on there called digestible energy, or DE, and that will give you a number. So it'll give you a number and the units will be megajoules per kilogram. And basically, the higher that number, the more calorific that feed is, the more calorie dense it will be, therefore the more conditioning it will be. So when it comes to trying to look for a type of feed to use, one of the main things is that if you're looking to add condition and add body weight, you want to make sure that you're feeding a calorie dense feed. And so, for example, to give you a rough estimate, somewhere between 12 and maybe like 13.5 megajoules per kilogram would be what we would term a conditioning feed. So say, for example, from Red Mills or Conditioning 14 mix or Horsecare Ultra Cubes, they would be around about those values, and therefore they're going to be a more conditioning feed than some others. One thing to note, I suppose, is that in any brand, not with Red Mills, any feed brand out there, digestible energy, which gives you your calorie content, the value is an estimate. So, always take it with a pinch of salt, but as a rough idea, anywhere around that 12 to 13.5 is going to give you a calorie dense diet. So that's one of the things to look at. The next thing then is the quality of ingredients for any feed product. You need high quality ingredients to be able to get the results you want. So if you're wanting to add condition, but you're feeding a low quality feed, you're going to have to feed a hell of a lot more of it to get to where you want to be, rather than feeding a high quality feed with high quality ingredients. You'll get there a lot quicker. You won't have to use as much feed, and it'll be a lot more efficient. So if you look at the bag of feed, the first three ingredients will make up the majority of what's in that. And so any ingredients will have an impact on it. So for example, your cereal grains like your oats, barley, maize, your fiber sources, soya hulls, alfalfa, oil, your soya oil, linseed oil, all of those aspects will make up the quality of the product will be made up by those ingredients, and then the amount of those ingredients used will make up the calorie density of the feed, is where I'm trying to get to with that. So you want to make sure that you have a high oil and fiber aspect of the feed, because they're more calorific than, for example, your cereal grains. So that's kind of what you'd be looking at in terms of a bag of feed. And then also you might want to consider, it's not really listed on a bag of feed, but just keep it in the back of your mind that how those ingredients are processed can also impact digestibility and how effective they are really at putting on condition. So for example, at Red Mills, we would use processes like steam cooking, extrusion, double pelleting if it's a cube. Whereas you can also have other processes like micronization, which wouldn't be as effective at increasing digestibility. So making sure that you have a high quality product is key. And what you also would want to consider is, when you're looking at adding condition, specifically for sales, is some non-heating options. So to make sure that you keep that temperament controlled and nice and even and balanced. So for example, our horse care ultra cubes that I mentioned, they're a really nice product to incorporate all three aspects of these. They're calorie dense, they've got high quality ingredients, but it's also non-heating because it's quite low in starch. So something like that would be, a good option for trying to add condition and making sure they're in the right state for sales. Top line development then, some of the things that need to be taken into consideration. Top line, as we all know, is quite important in terms of that overall look and giving them that finished outlook, and that nice, well developed musculature over the top of their body. Now, the thing that we need to take into consideration is it's not just feeding when it comes to top line. If you feed a high oil product and a high protein product and you're thinking, I'm going to build muscle, you cannot do that without appropriate exercise. So exercise and nutrition really work hand in hand to make sure that you can achieve a well-developed top line. Because exercise will obviously activate those particular muscle groups for conditioning, and then your diet will provide the nutrients needed to build that muscle. So it's important to take both into consideration when you're doing that, because while calories can't be turned into muscle, it's vital that the horse has a sufficient energy intake for the work that it's doing. Because otherwise that protein would be broken down into other elements and stored. So you need to make sure that it's being done appropriately, basically. And one of the key points for building top line would be a quality protein source. So lysine is the first limiting amino acid, which means it's limited in that the horse can't generate it itself. It has to be provided in the diet. So if you feed a diet higher in things like lysine, you will be much more effective at building top line. So some ingredients that are particularly high in lysine are things like soya. So if you have a product that is higher in things like soybean, so in the first three ingredients, if you've got soybean or soybean hulls or extruded full fat soya or anything like that, it will be much more effective for what you want to do in terms of building top line, obviously alongside the required exercise. Alfalfa would be another source that is becoming popular in terms of quality protein, but the lysine profile would be a lot higher in soya than it would be in alfalfa. So if you have ingredients that are similar along like soya and alfalfa in a product, then it's going to be effective alongside, products that are high in oil. So something that's high in linseed, for example, then that will be effective in helping you build the top line that you need. So a perfect product in terms of building top line would be something like Define and Shine. So it's designed for horses that are requiring extra calories to gain some weight, but it's also designed for building muscle and top line alongside supporting skin and coat health because it's high in oil, it's high in quality protein, but it's also low in starch. So if you have those key amino acids, you can help build that muscle because the amino acids are the building blocks, if you like, for the protein, and then that helps build the muscle. So if you've got a nice balance between amino acids and your oil sources with your omega-3 fatty acids, that's a really nice blend of things to help excuse me, to help build that top line. So the one thing I just would like to point out with Define and Shine though is that this is something that you would add into the diet. So where I was mentioning earlier about Horsecare Ultra being your product that would help add condition and things, you would add Define and Shine on top of Horsecare Ultra. Define and Shine is a top dress pellet in that it's not fully balanced with all your vitamins and minerals. So it can't be fed as a sole source of the diet because you would be lacking in some vitamins and minerals. It's designed to be added to a fully balanced diet. So you would feed, for example, your Horsecare Ultra as your mainstay and then add in 1 to 2 cups maybe of Define and Shine. It's a very low feeding rate because it's a condensed source of calories. That helps keep your meal sizes small. You're not kind of pushing those upper boundaries of large meal sizes that would then compromise digestive health. So it's really a nice addition to help round off that individual. And the nice thing with a product like this is that you don't have to use it for long term. Like you could use this just for your prep season. So if it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it might be, you can just use it for that period of time and help get that individual to where they need to be. And it will also give them a nice coat as well as helping them look a bit better in terms of condition and top line. So full sales prep then. The biggest thing I think with full sales is you need a well-handled individual, obviously from a practicality point of view. That can cause less stress if they're well handled and they're generally easier to prep. For foals to lose weight and loss of appetite and mild diarrhea, they're all things that can be associated with stress. So if you can reduce the amount of stress, you're going to reduce the potential for those adverse effects. The last thing you want is running into loads of problems during sales prep. So during weaning, they're obviously their immune system is suppressed. They're susceptible to infection and just any sort of issues that are going. That's usually when it'll creep in. So if you can keep them nice and calm and not very stressed as possible, then it can help. Now, look, weaning is obviously a stressful time for foals anyway, but control the controllables, keep them handled as much as possible and things. The key, like I said, I think earlier, is planning from the very start and making sure they have a balanced diet from conception onwards. They were nourished properly when they were in utero, in the foal, or in the mare, sorry. They were then, got appropriate colostrum, their milk supply was good, And then when they're weaned, they're given an appropriate creep feed. So they're really nourished at every single step. That can help keep that steady growth curve. The last thing we want for foals are these large peaks in a growth curve, because that's where we start to get issues like DODs, so epiphysitis, OCDs, things like that. When we get that spike in a growth curve, that's when things like that can creep in. So if we can keep that steady growth curve, it's really going to help minimize those issues. Keeping their body condition at an appropriate level is really important as well, especially for things like OCDs and epiphysitis. You don't want them getting too heavy, because then that obviously puts pressure on the joints. And you want to make sure that they can reach, an optimum height and condition at sale time. So we don't want them ever to be overtopped, and we don't also want a pot-bellied appearance. So the other thing you can consider is with hays, that if you can get a nice early cut hay and a nice leafy hay, that it's more digestible, and you won't have such a high lignin content, because that's harder to digest for them, and that can result in that pot-bellied appearance. So those are some very simple things to keep in mind in terms of management strategies. And then when it comes to actually feeding them, you want to keep meal sizes small. You want to be splitting your feeds up into 2 to 3 meals per day. They can have a reduced appetite during prep, so you want small meals but often. Which feed you choose will be dependent on the type of foal you have. So if you have a nice big strong foal that you just want to support a little bit rather than build them up, you would choose something like Grow Care Balancer. Whereas if you have a very weak foal and you really need to build them up a lot more in time for sales, you would use something like a foal pellet or a foal and yearling mix. So that's where you have the two options to kind of suit the individual. Other things that are really important as well is worming, making sure it's up to date, checking, getting some fecal samples tested is key, because strategic worming is more important than ever now with such resistance out there. You can get those fecal samples tested at the equine centre, and they can kind of give you an idea of egg count and what your best strategy is from there. The other things to consider for foals are calming supplements for the day of sale. So you want them to obviously be as calm as possible without being asleep. So something like the NutriCam gel can be very beneficial for the day of sale, because there's a lot of other stuff going on, and it can kind of just get reduced down all the sound that's going on in the outside environment and keep some of that stress away, but help them focus more on the task at hand, really, without having them sleepy or anything like that, because it's a calmer, not a sedative. So it's an option. The other thing then is feet, not to underestimate hoof quality, because you don't want, fever rings or anything like that. So considering biotin supplementation to support hoof wall strength can be an option, whether that's done through a supplement or elevating a particular feed. It can be done either way, but it's something to keep in mind, because you want them, again, we're talking about the overall picture, so you want everything to be supported and them to be looking their best on the day. And then looking at the 3-year-old instead of, on the 2 size foals and then 3-year-olds. Sales prep is an ongoing process for younger horses, because nutrition plays a role the whole way through. It's not something, your foals, you don't have as much time, obviously, and you're kind of doing what you can. Your 3-year-olds, you have a lot more time, but it's important not to underestimate, again, feeding the whole way through, making sure they're gradually progressing, and you're not just blowing them up with feed 8 weeks out from sales. And keeping their body condition at a steady level the whole way through. So a 3 out of 5 or a 5 out of 9, depending on the different scales. But you don't want too much pressure put on all of a sudden and start feeding them loads. 1, it'll cause digestive upset. 2, it'll cause stress. And 3, you're probably rushing it and won't get to where you need to be all of a sudden. So planning your feeding program is essential. And again, to be tailored to that individual. So if you need a more conditioning feed, there are options. Conditioning mix, Horse Care Ultra, topped up with Define and Shine. If you have a better doer and you don't want to feed them a calorie dense diet, we can go for lower calorie options like a balancer, and making sure we then supplement if they need, something like copper, which we'll come on to afterwards. But making sure that it's tailored to the individual is kind of key for those 3-year-olds to make sure that they are looking the way you want them to be. Coat health is obviously important. With, I mentioned copper, which we'll discuss separately, and oils, which we'll discuss separately as well. But they're probably 2 supplements that I would always use for sales prep. I wouldn't ever underestimate those 2. Supplements can obviously go a bit wild, but I don't think they're always needed in terms of loads of different things. But I think if you supplement strategically, it's much more effective. And things like copper and oil are very useful when it comes to sales prep. Condition, I mentioned, we've obviously got different types of feeds with high calorie, low calorie, lower starch, higher starch. If you've got a horse that you want more energy out of and you're not getting quite enough out of them in loose schooling or whatever it might be, then you might want a more higher starch diet. There are options for both. And that's where, give us a ring in Goresbridge at Red Mills, or we have an Ask the Expert form on our website. If you, just want to have a chat about what should I be doing for this horse looks like this, or whatever, then that's where we're on hand as a free service to give a help. And then obviously management strategies, we mentioned this already before, but making sure your exercise is gradually built and your workload suits fitness, rugging them at appropriate times. Irish weather is an absolute nightmare. God knows, no sheets today. We could have 2 rugs on again in a week. It's a bit of a nightmare, but look, there's nothing we can do about that. And then making sure worming and teeth are done as well, because sometimes that can be an issue. If you feel like you're feeding them and they're not putting on weight or whatever, there might be worming issues, there might be teeth issues. So it's always something to keep in the back of your mind to make sure that it's going the right way. Now, I mentioned energy sources. So main sources of energy are starches and sugars, fibers, and oils. Oil is about 2.5 times more calorific than starches and fibers. So if you're looking at fast release energy, what you need to get more spark, more flightiness out of them, and they're a bit laid back and you want that extra bit out of them, you're going to be looking at feeds that are higher in starch and higher in sugar. Typically a lot of mixes are higher, or horse care mixes aren't, but for example, horse cooked mix, which is a 14% traditional mix, oats, barley, maize, fast release, high in starch, high in sugar. Your competition mixes are high in starch and sugars. They'll give you more energy. Conditioning 14 mix is kind of somewhere in between the 2. It's not particularly low. It's not ridiculously high. So there's options for everything, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And it's not that if you opt for a lower starch product that you're not going to have any energy. Each horse is different in their temperament and how they cope with the process of sales prep. Some will need a lower starch product to keep them contained and keep them manageable. That's where you'd opt for something within our horse care range. But others might need that little bit extra. So it's a case again of looking at the individual and seeing what might suit them best and taking it from there. But again, if you're not sure and you want to have a chat through it, give us a ring, send us in a query, whatever it might be, and we're on hand to give that advice. But realistically, if you look at a bag of feed and the first 3 ingredients are oats, barley, maize, you're getting a high starch product. If your first 3 ingredients are soybean, alfalfa, wheat feed, you're getting a low starch product. So things like that, you can have an idea yourself, but if you're not sure, give us a ring. I mentioned copper briefly. So copper is something that plays an essential role in the equine diet, especially in breeding stock and young stock. So forage, hay, haylage, grass, fresh grass, preserved grass, it doesn't matter, will all be low typically in Ireland. So that won't meet that will not meet the requirements of young stock, weanlings, mares, competition horses. It won't meet nutritional requirements. So we need to supplement. Now, will be copper added to your heart to supplement on top of that. So it's really crucial with young stock that copper is taken into consideration because it's involved in your cartilage and bone development. It supports immune health. It obviously, the first thing you can see is coat color and pigmentation. It can have a very sudden impact sometimes with copper on things like that. Joint health is another one. In terms of your breeding stock and your mares, it can aid fertility in some cases, but it has also on the other side of that, a deficiency in copper has been shown to increase things like fetal death, delayed estrus, abortion, all of those things. So it's something that is very easy to supplement copper, and it's something that should be taken into consideration. So the most practical way I find of doing it is the Copper Max paste because it's a one and done kind of thing. You've got your chelated copper and zinc in there. Copper and zinc are balanced within the product so that the synthesis of both kind of happens synergistically. The one thing as well to point out with your breeding stock is that if it's been shown that if you supplement mares with copper in the final trimester of pregnancy, that you directly increase the fetal stores for the foal. So that copper is directly transferred and stored in the liver of the foal. So they're then born with more copper than they would have had, say, without supplementation, which will have an impact on cartilage development, bone development, immune function, all of those things. So supplementing your mare is very beneficial, but then supplementing your young stock is also important. So there was some work done on copper in terms of young stock, and it showed that I'm just checking because was it bone growth plates? Yeah. So when they were supplemented with copper, they had lower inflammation of their growth plates, which is where we get things like epiphysitis. So supplementation of copper had reduced that. There was fewer cartilage lesions for the young stock when not supplemented with copper. So it can have detrimental effects if you don't take it into consideration. There's also things like it can improve mare's milk. And the mineral stores are really relied on in the first few months of life. So giving them that extra help early on is really important. In terms of sales prep, copper vit can also be very handy because for prep you're generally feeding them, so you can add the liquid to the diet every day. Whichever way you choose, it doesn't matter. Practicality is what you'd take into consideration. So copper vit added to the feed every day. It's a very palatable liquid, never have any issues really reported. Copper Max paste is a syringe like a wormer. Give you an idea, 3 syringes of Copper Max paste would be worth roughly a month worth of the liquid added every day. So that's just kind of to give you a guide. As long as they get it, it doesn't really matter what way you choose to do it. But I would definitely make sure that you supplement with copper. The next thing then, the other supplementation I talked about earlier was oils. So One, when it comes to condition, it's a good source of calories. So it can be a benefit from that point of view. But obviously, coat and hoof health is really important, particularly for sales prep. And your oils like linseed oil are high in omega-3 fatty acids. So they have a natural anti-inflammatory effect. They also have a very positive effect on the immune system, joint health, digestive health. They're a lovely overall benefit, really, to any horse, never mind sales prep. Both of these oils that we have, the linseed oil and the Kentucky Karen oil, are forms of linseed. Your linseed is it's your plain basic linseed. Kentucky Karen oil is emulsified linseed oil. So when a horse digests oil internally, emulsification is the process that occurs. So by having an oil emulsified already, you've taken out the start of that digestion process, so it's more bioavailable to the horse. So by feeding something like Kentucky Karen oil, you're essentially a little bit more effective than feeding straight linseed oil. There's nothing wrong with feeding straight linseed oil. It's just that's the slight difference between the two products, and that's where Kentucky Karen oil might be a little bit more effective, essentially. It's also a slow release source of calories. So again, you're not going to add extra fizz by adding in an oil to the diet. And the other thing again is that if your horses aren't grazing on fresh grass consistently throughout sales prep, they'll be receiving lower levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the diet. Omega-3 fatty acids are quite high in fresh grass, but if they're not out grazing all the time during prep, then they'll be getting a lower level of that. And the other thing is just to say that everyone talks about omega-3s, but omega-3s and 6s should be balanced with each other, and these oils would be balanced with both. So that's another thing to take into consideration, is the quality of the oil that you're feeding, and how it would have a more beneficial effect, or how it would work in the long run for you. Then I think the last but not least point to take into consideration for sales prep is immune health. If you haven't got a healthy animal, you've got nothing because you won't get the sales. So it's really crucial for the overall well-being. You can feed to body condition, you can have them putting on weight and everything else, but if their immune health is on the floor, it won't happen as effectively. They'll look dull in their coat. They won't be happy in themselves. And it's really crucial, to be honest. Now, one of the things just to point out is over 70% of the immune system is in the gut. So, like I briefly mentioned there, if the immune system's on the floor, they won't be putting on weight as well. That's because the immune system is in and around the gut. So, making sure that gut health is optimized is key for supporting immune health. So this is a long-term thing. It's not something that could be fixed overnight. Immune health should be considered all the time, obviously not just during prep. But supporting gut health throughout their life really is going to help you have a more healthy animal. So looking at supplementing for the immune system, there are different ways to do it. Like I say, the long-term view is the better way to look at it. So with a product like NutriGuard, that is our new gut supplement, and that is a long-term product. That's not something that will have an effect in 2 weeks. It will have an effect over the course of 6 weeks onwards. It will start having an effect after 4, but onwards from that, you'll see more benefits. So that's a long-term thing to take into consideration. NutriGuard, we reformulated to include postbiotics. So you'd have heard a lot in the past, especially around gut supplements, with prebiotics, probiotics, a lot of these different words thrown around. Postbiotics then are basically, if you give a horse pre and probiotics internally, they'll utilize them and produce postbiotics. So by putting a postbiotic in the supplement already, you've skipped those stages and it's more effective, and can have a much more significant impact on actual gut health and maintaining that environment, making it more robust, therefore having an effect on overall health and immunity. So it really is a long-term thing, but it's something that should be taken into consideration, because if you have your happy pony living in the field forever and has never done anything with, they'll produce their own postbiotics, they'll be happy out. But the minute we start to do anything with our horses, whether it's sales prep or riding them or breaking them in, whatever it might be, that adds a level of stress. Whether we as horse people like to admit that or not, it adds a level of stress. Any sort of stress will have an impact on the gut. So if you can have a more robust gut, they'll be able to cope with that stress a lot better, and therefore sustain whatever it is or whatever discipline it is you're asking of them for longer, and it would be much more effective. So minimizing stress is important for two aspects: gut health, immunity, and also your individual in terms of their temperament and things alongside that. Maintaining a good body condition is crucial for overall well-being, obviously, but also immune health. Feeding a balanced diet alongside, looking at your supplementation is really important, and ensuring exercise is within fitness limits can also make sure that you're not pushing them too far, you're not getting them, run down and things. That's important to take into consideration. So these things are just, control the controllables. These are your things you can manage yourself, that you don't have to kind of worry about too much. But then supplementing is a different scenario. So NutriGuard is your long-term product that I would consider strongly. The other products on the screen there, Friscofol is a multivitamin and prebiotic syrup. That is like a little boost for your foals. So a lot of stuff farms would use this kind of anyway, but particularly if you have a foal ill thrift or just not 100%, once the first 24 hours or so has gone well, 48 hours, they can be given this from then on. But it's also, if you bring a foal in for after weaning, that's a particularly stressful time, and Friscofol can be a really nice supplement around that time to help support immune health and support that gut, because they're going through that bit of stress, and help keep immunity at a sustained level. Then the other product there is Chevenol. Chevenol is, I suppose it's similar to Friscofol. It's almost like your adult Friscofol. So it's a immune boost tonic, multivitamin, that type of thing. Chevenol could be used more on a short-term basis. So if you find they're not 100% coming in for prep and you only have 6 or 8 weeks potentially, then you could use Chevenol for that period of time to help give them a bit of an immune boost and get them to, being happy and healthy. Obviously, alongside a fully balanced diet to meet all nutrient requirements and keep them fully nourished is important. But these are options for supplementation. And I think when supplements are used properly, they have a place. I know it can get confusing with the supplement market because it's a bit, well, it's vast. There's a lot of products and it can be confusing. But if they're utilized in the right places, they can be very effective. And you find then that if you use them strategically, you don't need to use as many. So matching up your feeding, supplementation, and practical measures is really important, to make sure you're not pushing that immune system beyond its limits and then having your horse at a detrimental effect really is important. So advice and support is available. I mentioned our Ask the Expert website, our Ask the Expert section of our Red Mills website is on there. It's on our forum website as well. If you have queries, send them in, and myself or one of the other nutritionists on the team will get back to you. It's part of a service that we provide. You don't have to pay for it. You can attach pictures of your horses if you want us to see, are they too heavy, are they too light, what should I do? Then that service is available, so it's worth utilizing. I hope that has been beneficial and not been too quick of a rundown. if you have any questions, then I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you very much for that, Erin. That was fantastic. Just a couple of questions. When doing your prep for sales, is there much of a difference in the prep that you would do for, say, an Irish sports horse versus your Connemara or your draft or your naturally heavier types? How would you approach that one?
That's where feeding the individual comes into it. So if you have, a draft that typically is quite heavy and carries condition really, really well, then your hard feed might just be a balancer, and then you supplement alongside. If you have something that's, not taking the prep as well and you need to nourish it a little bit more, that's where you go for your high calorie, fully, complete feeds. Um, it's not so much that you have to feed a draft this and a Connemara this. It's more looking at the individual and what they need in terms of their body condition, how they're presenting to you, how they're starting to take that work, and going from there, really.
Brilliant. And then like that balancer, there's the grow care balancer and we have the performance care balancer for those horses that are a little bit older, but it's literally a cup. So if you are feeding horses in the field, you're bringing out a cup of feed for maybe 3 or 4 if that's what you're doing. But really convenient option when it comes to feeding horses. And like that, there is such a variety of horses that are being prepped for the sales. The next
Yeah.
question that has come in is regarding older horses. So a lot of this can stand if you're prepping an older horse that mightn't be going for the sales, or it might be going for the sales, but even if it's being prepped for private sale, it's still a lot of it stands, and that the copper for coat, all of those messaging is still there, would it be?
Yeah. The one thing I would say is with older horses is to be mindful of any potential metabolic issues. And therefore, if you're feeding an older horse for sale, or just feeding an older horse in general, you might want to consider feeding those lower starch type products. Again, balancers are low starch as well. You have balancers and ultra for low starch options. One's calorific, one's not. But it's the same principles for foals, 3-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds. It doesn't matter. The same principles are the same. Um, it's looking at the individual and what they might need. That's where talking to us individually really helps.
Perfect. And when you talk about feeding older horses, what age for you is older? When does that make the transition to an older horse?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I'm a thoroughbred person. So to me, older horses are not the same as they are in the sport horse world. But anything over 14, 15, I'd be looking at, taking into consideration what their extra needs are. Because from a scientific point of view, that's when things can change.
Ideal. And then I mentioned briefly on the private sales. When you are looking at selling a horse, it is that case where the same sort of prep can go in, isn't there? That deciding a little bit in advance and making sure that you're doing the best to present your horse in the best way that you can, particularly when you look at workload, when you look at all that goes into it.
Yeah. And it's matching up whatever that workload might be for prep to what you're feeding them. You feed to suit exercise, you don't exercise to suit feed. So making sure that you have that balanced up. When we always talk about a balanced diet, but it's balanced in more than one way. It's workload, it's overall health. It's making sure that everything is matched up. And looking at it before it's got to the stage where you're like, oh God, I'm 2 weeks from sale. This doesn't look the way I want it to look. What will I do? Because realistically, at that stage, there's not a whole lot you can do. There's a few things, yeah, that if you're panicking, we can help with, but these changes are slow because of the way horses are designed. Their guts are a huge space. Everything happens slowly. All changes are slowly. So everything needs to be planned and, weighed up in advance, and it's making sure that everything is matched up appropriately.
So that leads us on kind of nicely to supplements in general. You hear a lot of people who do a supplement for a week or two and are raving about it. How long do they tend to take to kind of take effect? And equally, if you're seeing benefit from a supplement in a horse, like, should you be keeping them on it? Should that be something they're consistently on then? Does it depend on the supplement?
It really depends on the supplement. So, there are some supplements that you could just use for a short-term period. Let's say, for example, you have something that's gone off its feed and its appetite is really reduced, won't touch anything. There might be a supplement that you use, say, for example, Be Complete from Foreign. You might use that for a short period of time to get them back on their feed, get them eating again. Once they're eating again, you can wean them off it. If you take, for example, NutriGuard that I was just talking about, if you start feeding NutriGuard, you can't really stop. So you can maybe when they're thrown out to the field and it's off season, but say for your performance period or prep period or whatever it might be, if you start feeding something like that, that's a long-term product. And that's something that you probably won't see any benefits from before you're using it for at least 4 weeks. And then after that, it's an ongoing process. You shouldn't just take them off it again straight away because you see a benefit at 4 weeks. So it's really supplement specific. I mentioned things like Chevenol there can be used on a short-term basis. Whereas, a hoof supplement, for example, would be a longer term product because nothing happens quickly with feet. Any sort of hoof growth or anything like that it's always really slow. So it really is supplement specific. As a general rule, unless it's an appetite stimulant, I would be cautious of, I'd say you'd want to be on something for at least 2 weeks as a general rule, before you'd see benefits, but it does depend on the supplement. Some people can start something and say within 2 days, amazing, look at the difference. But I would be asking straight away, oh, what was it? And, how was it used and how is it fed and all that. So it's really product specific.
I think that does come back to that point of asking the experts, like the team that are available. I know I spend my whole time texting our team with questions about my own horses, and it is that it's any of those questions. Half the time, like I obviously work with Redmonds, and half the time I'm texting going, "There's something in my head here. I don't know if I'm going mad or is it something that I'm looking at."
And
And
I think,
it's where real value comes in of the team.
yeah, and I think alongside that, like, it's not being afraid to ask those questions because you could be already feeding, I don't know, let's say 3 different supplements. And you might think, oh, well, I've got something that's low in copper, but one of those products might already have copper in it. Or, there might be things that you can tweak and you might then change those 3 to one product, or you might not need to add an extra. Or, we like to keep things as simple as possible. We like to keep it practical. I'm not a fan of just firing loads of supplements in and hoping that they all work. Um, I think that things should be added for a reason and then they have a benefit.
And then when you get to the sales, is there any advice that you can give for kind of that like travel to the sales, early days at the sales?
I think electrolytes is very important when it comes to traveling to and from the sales. You can kind of load electrolyte doses before the sales. So say you give say for example the refuel syringes for the week leading up to sales. There's been a lot of research done to say that if you load electrolytes beforehand, it can reduce the impact of that travel stress. So electrolytes leading up to sales is important. If you find that they're then flat at the sales, something like pre-fuel syringes can help because you might need to get that extra bit out of them if they've lost kind of. Sometimes they can just have that lull after traveling, and it can take a bit out of them. So there are things you can do. On the other hand, I mentioned it in the presentation, but on the other hand, if you need to keep them a bit more contained, Nutricam. I think if you're looking at supplementation in and around sales to benefit or control things, then it's really those syringes that can help. For vetting, making sure that they're nice and clear of their airways, air vent gel is a great benefit. Just if you're getting to the sales, there's a lot of dust and respirable particles everywhere. A quick syringe of air vent can just help make sure that those airways are open, they're nice and clear, and maybe reduce some of those problems that can occur. It's not something that I would say, unless you have a particular worry, I wouldn't say you need to, feed a respiratory supplement the whole way through sales prep, but it might be something you just have to use at the sales because there's so much dust and things going on. So yeah, I would definitely consider some of those syringes in and around sales time because they're concentrated formats. They're for that one use. And it's not something that you have to supplement long term. So again, that comes back to what you were saying earlier about, supplements for specific times. It's supplement specific. It's what you want from it. But the one thing I would say for all horses going to the sales is electrolytes actually for traveling.
And as well with those syringes, they're in triple packs. They're so convenient. They're so handy. You can have a pile of them in the lorry, in the Jeeps,
Leave them.
where like literally wherever. We always use the tagline with the pre-fuel refuel combo, don't leave home without them. And genuinely, if you look at my car, I have them in the car. Even when I don't have the horses, I have the pre-fuel and the refuel because it's just that habit of having them with us.
I
They're
know.
so convenient to have available to hand. And it's that classic thing. You'd rather have them and be looking at them than be looking
Then
for
one.
them if you're
Yeah.
running around a sales venue trying to figure something out. It just
100%.
keeps everything so much more settled and so much more relaxed.
Yeah.
And the other thing would be the consistency. So when you're getting to the sales, feeding the same feeds, the same supplements, not
Very important.
suddenly changing forage source, all
Yeah.
those sort of smaller details, but the important ones.
Yeah, that's what like those practicality things, the management pieces, you can't underestimate that. Keep things as smooth as possible, control the controllables, so keep it the same. Try and reduce. There's enough stress going on. There's enough external environment for the horses to take in without extra stressors being added. So yeah, those things are definitely crucial as well.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that, Erin. That was a fascinating look at sales prep. And I suppose looking at it in that sport horse lens, but there is so much that can be taken away from this, whether you're going on the sport horse side or whether you're prepping foals for the thoroughbred sales. It's the same the same animal at the end of the day. So there's a lot to be taken in both of them. As always, if people do have any questions at all, please do ask the experts. It'll be linked in the description below on this webinar. As always, the Irish Horse Sport, all members, you do get access to our expert nutrition team. Everybody does. So make sure if you do have questions, you'd rather reach out, ask, and get an answer for them than be wondering or pushing it off and being delayed on fixing something that might actually be a very simple tweak at the end
And
of the day.
actually, a lot of the time, that's the case. It can
Yeah.
be very simple. So yeah, reach out and yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you so much.